Imagine a sweltering summer evening roughly 4,500 years ago, along the marshy, reed-thick banks of the Tigris River in what we now call Iraq. The air is heavy with the scent of silt and roasting grain, and the low sun is painting the mud brick walls of a nearby city in shades of deep ochre. Two people are standing close together in the shadows of a date palm grove, away from the prying eyes of the temple priests and the bustling marketplaces. They lean in, their faces tilting just slightly, and their lips meet in a long, lingering press. A gesture that, in this exact moment, bridges the gap between prehistory and the world we recognize today. It is a quiet, private act, yet it carries the weight of a biological revolution that was already thousands of years in the making. But let's bring this back to your own life for a second, because as ancient as that scene feels, the mechanics of it haven't actually changed all that much. You've likely been there yourself, perhaps standing on a porch under a flickering streetlight or in the back of a crowded cinema, feeling that strange, magnetic pull that makes you want to smash your face against someone else's face. When you stop to think about it, which, let's be honest, is a great way to ruin a perfectly good date, kissing is an incredibly bizarre behavior. We are essentially exchanging a cocktail of bacteria and saliva while pressing sensitive membranes together in a way that serves no immediate survival purpose like eating or breathing. It's the kind of thing an alien biologist would find deeply confusing, yet to us, it feels like the most natural thing in the world. For a long time, the prevailing wisdom was that we could pinpoint exactly when this madness started, but new research has recently turned that timeline upside down. If you had asked a historian a few years ago, they probably would have told you that kissing originated in ancient India about 3,500 years ago, based on certain Sanskrit texts. But in 2023, two researchers, Troels Pank Arbol from the University of Copenhagen and Sophie Lund Rasmussen from the University of Oxford, published a groundbreaking paper in the journal Science that pushed the record back even further. They sifted through thousands of cuneiform tablets from ancient Mesopotamia, which, considering the sheer volume of clay they had to analyze, is a level of academic patience I can barely fathom, and found clear evidence that kissing was a common, well-established part of romantic life at least 4,500 years ago. This discovery changes the narrative from kissing being a specific invention of one culture to it being a widespread, almost universal human experience that was already deep-seated by the time we started writing things down. These ancient tablets describe kissing as something that happened after sex, as a gesture of affection, and even as something that could be socially inappropriate if done by the wrong people in the wrong place. This suggests that the when of kissing isn't a single date on a calendar, but rather a slow, creeping evolution that started long before the first city-states ever rose from the dust. To understand why we started doing this, we have to look at the how, and the how usually starts with dinner. Specifically, the kind of dinner you probably wouldn't want to be invited to. One of the leading theories among evolutionary biologists, famously championed by the ethologist Irenaeus Abel-Eibsfeld, is that romantic kissing evolved from pre-mastication or kiss feeding. Before the invention of processed baby food, and before we had high-powered blenders to turn everything into a convenient slurry, ancient mothers would chew up tough meat or fibrous plants and then pass the softened bolus of food directly into their infants' mouths, lip to lip. Now, I know that sounds like a nightmare scenario for anyone with a germ phobia, but for our ancestors, this was a critical survival mechanism. It provided babies with essential nutrients they couldn't process themselves, and more importantly, it created a deep, neurochemical bond between the mother and the child. Over hundreds of thousands of years, our brains began to associate that specific physical contact, the pressure of the lips and the proximity of the face, with safety, trust, and intense comfort. Eventually, and this is where the evolutionary bridge comes in, those same neural pathways were hijacked by the reproductive system. The gesture that once signaled, "I am feeding you and keeping you alive," transformed into, "I trust you enough to be this close to my face," which is the ultimate green light in the world of primitive romance. Of course, once you move past the baby food phase of the explanation, you realize that kissing serves a much more cold, calculated biological purpose than just making us feel warm and fuzzy. Your face is essentially a walking, talking laboratory of information, And kissing is the way your brain runs a high-speed diagnostic test on a potential partner. When you kiss someone, you are physically close enough to engage your olfactory system in a way that is usually impossible in polite society. You are smelling their breath, their skin, and the specific pheromones they are pumping out into the air. This brings us to one of the most famous, and slightly gross, studies in the history of psychology, the sweaty t-shirt study conducted by Claus Wedekind in 1995. Wedekind had men wear the same t-shirt for 2 nights and then asked women to sniff the shirts and rank them based on which scent they found most attractive. The results were startlingly consistent. Women overwhelmingly preferred the scent of men whose major histocompatibility complex, or MHC genes were most different from their own. The MHC is a set of genes that controls your immune system, and biology wants you to pair up with someone who has a different set of tools in their immune kit than you do, because that genetic diversity gives your future children a much better chance of surviving a wide range of diseases. Kissing, then, is essentially a genetic sniff test, disguised as a romantic moment. Which, if you think about it, makes your first kiss feel less like a movie scene and more like a TSA security screening. Your brain is processing massive amounts of data about your partner's health, their hormone levels, and their genetic compatibility in the span of a few seconds. If the data doesn't match, if your MHC genes are too similar, your brain might suddenly decide that the person you thought was attractive 5 minutes ago is actually a bit off, even if you can't explain why. But here is where the mystery of ancient kissing takes a sharp, confusing turn. If kissing is such a powerful biological tool for picking a healthy partner, why doesn't everyone on Earth do it? In 2015, a researcher named William Jankowiak conducted a massive cross-cultural study of 168 different societies around the globe and discovered something that shocked the academic world. Only 46% of those cultures practiced romantic sexual kissing. The other 54% found the idea either confusing, unnecessary, or in some cases, genuinely revolting. Some indigenous groups in Central America and the Arctic, for example, have historically viewed the exchange of saliva as a dangerous or unclean practice. Instead of kissing, they might rub their noses together, which, contrary to the Eskimo kiss stereotypes, is actually a way of smelling the other person's cheeks and forehead to gather that same biological data we talked about earlier. This suggests that while the need to scan a partner is universal, the specific choice to use our mouths to do it might be a cultural software update that only some parts of the human family tree decided to install. This cultural split creates a massive, which came first, puzzle for historians. Did we start kissing because it was the most efficient way to scan for MHC genes? Or did we start doing it for social reasons and then find out it was useful for biology? The evidence from ancient Mesopotamia suggests it might have been a bit of both. In the Sumerian and Akkadian languages that are so old they make Latin look like modern slang, there were multiple words for kissing, some of which were used in religious rituals and others that were clearly reserved for the bedroom. By the time we get to the Bronze Age, kissing wasn't just an instinct, it was a status symbol and a social ritual. As these ancient civilizations began to grow and interact, something else started to travel along with the gesture of kissing: viruses. This is where the story of our first kiss takes on a slightly darker, more haunting tone. Researchers studying the history of the herpes simplex virus 1, HSV1, which causes cold sores, have found that the modern lineage of the virus actually underwent a massive migration or shift about 5,000 years ago. This timing overlaps almost perfectly with the rise of urban centers in Mesopotamia and the documented spread of romantic kissing. Christiane Scheib, a geneticist who has worked on the ancient DNA of these pathogens, suggests that the rise of kissing as a cultural norm might have been the primary driver that allowed certain viruses to conquer the human population. Before we were all pressing our lips together, these viruses likely struggled to jump from person to person. But once kissing became a standard part of romance, not to mention a way to show devotion to gods or kings, it created a superhighway for transmission. We literally evolved our social habits, and the microbes evolved right alongside us, turning our most intimate moments into their greatest opportunity for expansion. This brings us to a fascinating realization about the humans who lived through that transition. Imagine being an ancient farmer in the Indus Valley or a scribe in Babylon, feeling that sudden, inexplicable urge to lean in towards someone you care about. You wouldn't have known about MHC genes or the major histocompatibility complex. You wouldn't have known that you were helping a virus map out its future kingdom. You would have only known that your heart was racing thanks to a sudden spike in norepinephrine, and that the world seemed to disappear around you as your brain flooded your system with dopamine. The biological loop of a kiss is incredibly potent. When your lips touch, your brain immediately suppresses the production of cortisol, the stress hormone, and replaces it with oxytocin, often called the cuddle hormone. This chemical shift creates a sense of profound attachment and security. It is nature's way of saying, "Stop looking, stay here, this person is safe." And in the dangerous, unpredictable world of the ancient past, where a rival tribe or a hungry predator could end your life at any moment, that feeling of safety was worth more than gold. But there's a catch, because there's always a catch in evolutionary biology. While kissing reduces stress and builds bonds, it also acts as a filter. A study from Oxford University found that women, in particular, use kissing as a way to evaluate a partner's long-term potential. If the first kiss is bad, it's often a deal-breaker, not because of a lack of skill, but because the chemical signaling didn't line up. This means that for thousands of years, kissing has been acting as a silent, invisible gatekeeper of the human gene pool. If your ancestors hadn't been good at that chemical exchange, you wouldn't be here today listening to this. Your entire existence is the result of a successful laboratory test conducted on a prehistoric date. As we look back at the 4,500-year-old clay tablets from Mesopotamia, we see a society that was already struggling with the same complexities of intimacy that we face today. They wrote about the jealousy that a kiss could spark, the sacred nature of a kiss between a priestess and a king, and the simple, quiet comfort of a kiss at the end of a long day. They were remarkably like us, trapped in a biological system that they felt but didn't fully understand. And considering they also wrote a lot about beer and complaining about the quality of copper they bought, the similarities are honestly a bit uncanny. The transition from the ancient world to the modern one is often measured in technological leaps. The wheel, the steam engine, the internet, but the most profound changes often happen in the quietest ways. The moment we decided that the mouth was no longer just for eating and speaking, but for knowing another person, we changed the trajectory of our species. We became more connected, more vulnerable, and more susceptible to the tiny organisms that live within us. We often think of evolution as something that happened a million years ago to creatures that looked like apes, but evolution is happening in every awkward first kiss you've ever had. It's happening in the way your pupils dilate when someone leans in close, and in the way your brain meticulously records the scent of their skin. We are the products of a 4,000-year-old trend that never went out of style, a biological ritual that survived the fall of empires, the rise of religions, and the birth of science itself. It's strange to think that such a small gesture could carry so much data, so much history, and so much risk. We kiss to find the one, to bond with our families, and to soothe our anxieties, all while unknowingly participating in a genetic scanning process that hasn't changed since the Bronze Age. We are modern people living in a digital world, yet when we close our eyes and lean in, we are perfectly synchronized with those two lovers standing in the date palm grove by the Tigris River. We are doing exactly what our biology demands of us, oblivious to the ancient machinery grinding away beneath the surface of our skin. The next time you find yourself in that moment, the one where the air gets thin and the conversation dies away and you realize you're about to lean in, try to remember that you aren't just making a choice. You are participating in a deep time experiment that has been running since before the pyramids were built. You are the latest data point in a study on human survival, driven by a brain that still thinks it's trying to decide if this person has the right immune system to help you survive a prehistoric winter. Which, incidentally, is a lot of pressure to put on a first date, so maybe don't think about it too hard. Our ancestors didn't have the words for dopamine or oxytocin, and they didn't have the tools to see the viruses they were trading, but they felt the power of the connection just as intensely as we do. They knew that a kiss could change everything, that it could turn a stranger into a partner, or a ritual into a memory. They built civilizations out of mud and stone, but they built their lives out of these tiny, private moments of contact. When we ask when ancient humans started kissing, the answer isn't a date on a map. The answer is that we started kissing the moment we needed to see someone else's soul through the chemistry of their skin. We started kissing when the risk of the other became less important than the need for the us. And as much as we like to think we've outgrown our primitive roots, we are still those same creatures, huddled together in the dark, using our faces to find a reason to trust each other. So, as you go back to your day, perhaps seeing a couple on a park bench or catching a romantic scene on a screen, remember the Sumerian scribes and the Mesopotamian lovers. Remember the sweaty t-shirt, study, and the 46% of cultures that do things differently. We are a strange, scent-obsessed, chemical-driven species that has turned a feeding habit into a high-stakes genetic screening tool, and we've been doing it since the very beginning of recorded time. It's a messy, beautiful, and slightly unhygienic legacy, but it's the one that made us who we are. It's easy to feel like we're in control of our romantic lives, but the deeper you look into the history of the kiss, the more you realize we're just following a script that was written in the dirt of Mesopotamia and the DNA of our ancestors. We are the actors in a play that's been running for 5 millennia, and the audience is a trillion microscopic bacteria waiting for their next chance to travel. And if you're wondering why that feels a bit unsettling, well, that's just your prehistoric brain realizing it's been caught in the act. Ultimately, the act of kissing remains the great human paradox. It is the most intimate thing we can do, yet it is also a cold, biological necessity. It is a sign of deep love, yet it is also a vector for ancient diseases. It is a modern ritual, yet it is a prehistoric relic. We are still standing by that river in the shadows of the palm trees, leaning in, searching for something in the breath of another person that we can't find anywhere else. And even after 4,500 years of practice, we are still just as breathless and confused as the very first person who ever tried it. Everything we feel during a kiss is just a clever distraction while our bodies decide if our partner is genetically fit to help us survive the night. To your brain, romance is simply the most efficient way to ensure your immune system doesn't die out. Your heart doesn't flutter because you've found your soulmate. It flutters because your DNA has finished its interrogation and liked the answers. We are all just walking laboratories, performing the same ancient experiment over and over again until the results come back positive. If you found this look into our biological history fascinating, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think our modern world has made kissing less about biology and more about culture? Or are we still just as driven by our genes as those ancient Mesopotamians were? There's a whole world of hidden evolutionary secrets just like this one. So if you want to keep exploring the strange ways our past still controls our present, consider sticking around for the next deep dive. But before you go, just consider one final thought about those two people by the Tigris River, thousands of years ago. They didn't have the science to explain why their pulses were hammering, and they didn't have the history to know they were starting a trend that would last forever. They just knew that in that moment, the rest of the world didn't matter. And maybe that's the real reason kissing stuck around. Not because of the MHC genes or the pre-masticated food, but because for a few seconds, it lets us forget that we are just biological machines trying to survive. We are a species that learned to turn a diagnostic test into a reason to stay together. The truth is that you are never actually alone in your most intimate moments. Thousands of generations of ancestors are watching through your eyes, and millions of years of evolution are guiding your lips. You are the culmination of a vast, ancient process that has spent eons perfecting the art of the lean-in. And no matter how much we learn about the chemistry and the history, the feeling will always be the same. You are not the master of your own desires. You are merely the host for a 5,000-year-old biological parasite that uses your heart to find its next home.